Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If you could please take your seats, we're going to begin. Hello, and let me welcome you, first of all, to the Grand Ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in Seoul, South Korea. Let me be the first to say 감사합니다, thank you very much, to our hosts, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Republic of Korea and the UNDP. Now, throughout today's event, there will be interpretation services available in English and Korean. There are devices at your seat, so please make use of them. Channel 1 is Korean and Channel 2 is English. At the end of each session, leave it on your seat and then return to your seat and use it again. And then if I could also ask you all to please turn your mobile phones at least to silent so that they don't disrupt the proceedings and that so you can better concentrate on whatever's being said, that would be great. So my name is Rajesh Merchandani. I'm a correspondent and anchor for BBC News, based out of London, covering international affairs with a particular interest in development issues. That's what brings me here. You all are here because there is a demand for dialogue on how to deliver the post-2015 development agenda. And you are all experts in your relative fields and bring specific perspectives, experience, and knowledge to the conversation, whether that be from inside government, on the ground, in the fields of sustainability, finance, partnerships. These are all key components of the conversation towards a framework for delivery of the post-2015 agenda. In a few minutes, I'll explain how the day will be broken up, but I wanted just to get going and get a flavor of what we're going to be talking about by inviting a couple of our most distinguished guests to make some opening remarks. So first of all, I would like to invite to take the stage His Excellency Tae-yul, who is the second Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Republic of Korea. Your Excellency, if you'd please like to take the stage. Mr. Cho has more than 34 years' experience working in international relations and foreign affairs, including a variety of diplomatic and ministerial posts. And Mr. Cho, I'll hand it over to you.
Madam Rebeca Grynspan, Minister Kim Sung-Hwan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the Seoul Post-2015 conference, jointly organized by UNDP and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. With only 800 days remaining until the target date for the Millennium Development Goals, the Seoul Conference is aimed at discussing an effective implementation mechanism for a new development paradigm post-2015. It is indeed a timely and meaningful initiative. Let me first of all express my special appreciation to Madame Grynspan, Associate Administrator of UNDP, and my former boss, Minister Kim Sung-Hwan, for joining us in this important event. I would also like to thank the staff of the UNDP, especially the Seoul Policy Center, for the excellent preparation for this conference. The relationship between Korea and UNDP is special indeed. The history of the UNDP country office in Korea is in fact the history of Korea's economic development per se. Since it started operations in Korea 50 years ago, UNDP has remained a strong supporter for Korea's effort to eradicate poverty and modernize its economy. Delivering around 270 programs, UNDP has trained personnel in the areas of industry, agriculture, and science technology. It has also contributed to modernizing the port of Busan, which has now grown to become the 5th busiest port in the world, container port in the world. Today, Korea is a full-fledged donor country and ranks 12th on the Human Development Index. In 2009, UNDP finally closed its country office when Korea joined the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD. The country office in Korea is in fact the only UNDP office that completed its mandate of supporting the development efforts of a recipient country. As UNDP once lent a helping hand to Korea in the time of need, Korea is now reaching out to the world, working together with the UNDP to eradicate poverty across the globe. And today's conference is the fruit of the 50-year-long friendship and solidarity between Korea and UNDP. Distinguished guests, eradicating global poverty is humanity's common mission in the 21st century. It is the spirit of the era. The history of mankind, which was tainted with tensions and conflicts among religions, races, and ideologies, ushered in a new era with the launching of the MDGs in the year 2000. This accomplishment illustrated the international community's genuine commitment to come together and advance a common prosperity. It was only possible because of shift in our thinking that poverty was not a problem for individual countries alone, but a problem for the international community as a whole. During the past 13 years, the international community, especially the United Nations, has been striving to attain the MDGs, more specifically the 8 goals and the 18 accompanying targets. As a result, despite the global economic crisis, substantial progress has been made, especially in the areas of eradicating extreme poverty, wiping out malaria and tuberculosis, and improving sources of water. And such achievements attest to the fact that the quest to reach the MDGs was not merely a campaign wrapped in abstract rhetoric. Nevertheless, we still have a long way to go. We now face new challenges that were not anticipated in our path towards the MDGs: the deepening income inequality, increase in the number of marginalized people, climate change that is threatening our environmental sustainability, and the declining development finance on account of the economic downturn. Recently, the international community has been trying to define the post-2015 development paradigm that will take these new challenges by taking into account not only the successes, but also trials and errors made in our pursuit of the MDGs. And in the report of the UN Secretary General on the post-2015 development agenda, reached last August, a number of key elements were proposed, among others: universality to all countries, leaving no one behind; sustainable development; economic transformation; peace and governance; and a new global partnership. This vision that is more people-centered than ever before is a promise to future generations that the international community will focus on a more universal mechanism for implementation. Distinguished guests, British playwright John Fletcher once said, "These, not words, shall speak me." Likewise, without an effective implementation mechanism, the post-2015 development agenda will ring hollow. The decision by UNDP to add the post-2015 implementation mechanism as the 12th theme of the thematic consultations is a manifestation of the commitment of the international community to ensure that the next set of development goals will be met. As you know, UNDP has been collecting inputs and views from around the world in the framework of the thematic consultations and identified 11 themes for the post-2015 development agenda. To effectively carry out the post-2015 development agenda, pooling the scattered capacity and resources is essential. Accordingly, we need to build a new global partnership embracing various development actors. The global partnership should also be forged in and among areas that are directly linked to the economic growth of developing countries, such as energy, trade, science and technology, and development finance. We should also share best practices globally while setting up a system that promotes building partnerships in strategically important areas. Today's development landscape differs greatly from the time the MDGs were launched. For instance, South-South cooperation is expanding while the civil society and the private sector are emerging as new development actors. Going forward, partnerships between developed and developing countries, as well as among civil society, businesses, local governments, will become the key drivers in implementing the post-2015 development agenda. We have already witnessed the importance of global partnerships while implementing the MDGs. Initiatives such as Every Woman, Every Child initiative, Sustainable Energy for All, and Education First initiative are cases in point of how a global partnership paved the way for real progress in the areas of women, children, energy, and education. We hope that the standalone partnerships that have developed in the course of implementing the MDGs will expand in a more systematic manner in the post-2015 era. In this regard, I believe it is necessary to actively make use of international institutional assets, such as the Busan Global Partnership that was launched in 2012. Distinguished guests, when President Kennedy dubbed the 1960s as the development decade, Korea was still struggling to recover from the ruins of war and the pains of poverty. Fortunately, under a strong political leadership and a can-do spirit, that prevailed among its people, Korea was able to achieve industrialization and democratization in a relatively short period of time. And in 2009, Korea became the 24th member of the OECD DAC, the Club of Donor Countries, which was founded 49 years ago. Korea is clearly a latecomer when it comes to development cooperation as a donor country, but rest assured that the commitment of the Korean government and the people to eradicate global poverty is strong and genuine. In fact, KOICA, the development arm of the Korean government, which was established in 1991, has thus far sent nearly 10,000 Korean volunteers abroad, and Korea has now become only second to the United States in terms of the number of volunteers sent abroad for development cooperation. In the year 2010, as chair of G20, Korea successfully took an initiative for drawing up the Seoul Development Consensus, thereby placing development in the center of the G20 agenda. In 2011, as host of the Busan High-Level Forum on Aid Effectiveness, Korea played a leading role in shifting the global development cooperation paradigm from aid effectiveness to effective development and building a more comprehensive and inclusive partnership for development cooperation. The motivation that is driving Korea to step up its efforts in the area of poverty eradication lies in our strong resolve to pay back the international community what we have received. We are committed to share the know and experiences that we have accumulated while overcoming poverty in a span of a generation. Korea's development assistance cannot compare with that of other donor countries in terms of history and scale. However, as part of the global value chain, Korea will continue to make efforts to add value to the development cooperation landscape based on its unique development experiences. Systematic industrialization policies, successful rural development characterized by 새마을운동 or New Village Movement, a passion for education, and a strong leadership to coordinate development policies are some of the assets we hope to share with other developing countries. We intend to differentiate our development cooperation from those of traditional donor countries with a focus on quality rather than quantity, using our unique experience as valuable asset. Simply put, we will pursue an ODA that produces results, an ODA that can be appreciated by the global citizens. To this end, we hope to further enhance our cooperation with UNDP. The Park Geun-hye government, which took office early this year, is focusing on building trust. Trust means making promises that can be delivered and keeping promises that have been made. President Park declared her firm commitment to contribute to building a happy global village by placing trust politics at the core of Korea's foreign policy. This vision is in line with that of the post-2015 development paradigm, which is to open an era where all global citizens can realize their rights and live with hope and dignity. Korea is well aware of the pains and agonies of developing countries for the simple reason that we have been there as well. Korea, therefore, is well placed to seek solutions to problems that many developing countries face. We will actively support developing countries to eliminate the bottlenecks needed to escape from poverty and stand alone without assistance. We will put ourselves in their shoes and support their efforts to enhance the capacity to resolve problems on their own. Tailored development assistance, full of humility and empathy, is a development cooperation model that Korea is pursuing. Ladies and gentlemen, at the United Nations General Assembly on September 24th, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said that ours is the first generation that can wipe poverty from the face of the earth. I believe this bears witness to his confidence that the international community has the capacity to eradicate poverty. It is my hope that all development partners will come together and combine their efforts and resources to forge a global partnership for the post-2015 development paradigm. This will help move up the date for eradicating poverty and bringing about greater prosperity across the globe. The comments and proposals to be made during this conference will serve as precious intellectual assets in our move towards this shared goal. I can assure you that Korea will actively take part in the global efforts to design an effective implementation mechanism for the post-2015 development agenda and carry them out sincerely and enthusiastically. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, for those comments. I'd now like to invite up to the stage Rebeca Grynspan, who most of you will already know, but to remind you, she is the appointed by the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as UN Under-Secretary General and UNDP Associate Administrator since 2010. Before that, she was the Vice President of Costa Rica, promoting La Pura Vida, and held a number of ministerial posts in that country. Ms. Grynspan is one of the strongest voices for human development, and I'd like to welcome her to the stage. Thank you very much.
Mr. Cho Tae-yul, Second Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the Republic of Korea, Mr. Kim Sung-Hwan, Chair of the Institute for Global Social Responsibility and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Korea, dear friend At Melkert, former Special Representative of the UN Secretary General in Iraq and former UNDP Associate Administrator. I learned a lot from him. And I want to also welcome all the members of government, partners, colleagues, and friends that are here in this conference. Let me thank very especially Mr. Cho for your very thoughtful remarks and for putting UNDP contribution to Korea's development in the light of the long term. Korea is such a successful development example and represents so much for all of us that are development practitioners. So really thank you very much for this partnership. And let me give a special thanks to the Republic of Korea for hosting us, for its warm welcome to Seoul, and for its strong support in the post-2015 consultation process. As a member of the UN Secretary General High-Level Panel, represented by former Minister Kim, who is here with us to share its recommendations and perspective. Let me also welcome all the participants and speakers to this conference on the implementation of the post-2015 agenda that is no doubt a central aspect of any agreement to be reached by governments. There is wide consensus that the MDGs brought together donors, governments, civil society, the media, and other partners around a common vision on time-bound, measurable, and easily understood objectives grounded in shared values. The success of the MDGs is bringing attention to persistent development gaps, and its accountability framework did help to advance progress on human development and improve the lives of millions around the world. But as the Vice Minister rightly said, we still have a long way to go, and I will refer to some of the challenges in the panel next. The developing world in the MDGs committed to achieve MDGs from 1 to 7, and the developed world committed to MDG 8 on specific targets on aid, debt release, ICT, and medicines. However, as highlighted in the MDG Gap report launched a few weeks ago by the Secretary General, despite important progress in many fronts, there is a gap between the initial level of ambition around Goal 8 and its implementation. Falling levels of ODA, especially in the last 2 years, have raised concerns about the future development framework. ODA, no doubt, will continue to be very important, especially for an important group of countries. So we should not let the commitments made fade away. Korea has to be especially commended for its growing commitment to ODA and proactive involvement in the cooperation community. An example is the 4th High-Level Forum on Aid Effectiveness in 2011 in Busan that showed Korea's leadership and commitment to the aid and development effectiveness agenda. 160 countries and 45 international organizations have endorsed the Busan principles to date. Korea has also played a leading role in the definition of the G20 development agenda, as was rightly said, and has ensured that it will be aligned with the acceleration of the MDGs and ongoing discussions around the post-2015 agenda. But besides the ODA discussion, there is also growing awareness that the achievement of sustainable development objectives will require an effective use of all sources of financing. New and innovative sources of financing, such as development bonds, travel and financial transaction taxes, climate finance, remittances, and the mobilization of internal domestic revenues should all be better harnessed to advance sustainable development objectives. To this end, an intergovernmental committee of experts on sustainable development financing has been established by the UN General Assembly as an outcome of the Rio+20 conference. The committee will consider how to mobilize resources from a variety of sources and utilize effective financing to give strong support to developing countries in their efforts to promote sustainable development. I am very glad that the panel has among its members also a representative of Korea. And that these deliberations here today will really, be able to input into the discussions that the committee of experts will have. UNDP works with countries, helping them in many cases to generate and use development funds effectively. Through this work, we have learned the importance of bringing national and international stakeholders and partners together behind concrete targets, building capacities and institutions backed by systems of information, transparency, and mutual accountability frameworks. All of us know how stronger accountability systems are and will continue to be key at the national, regional, and global level. The high-level political forum set up by the Rio+20 conference is a step forward and might fill this role at the global level. While at the regional level, peer reviews and mutual accountability mechanisms could step in. At the local level, citizens will need to be empowered to engage, help monitor results, and hold their governments to account, including through new technologies. As we move into the future post-2015 agenda, therefore, it is critical we generate the momentum, enthusiasm, and broad engagement which make such partnership work. With this in mind, and building on the lessons learned from the current MDGs, the UN has launched a global conversation on the shape and nature of the future agenda. We at the UN have been humbled by the result. Well over 1 million people, in fact, 1.4 million, over 190 countries have participated, sharing their perspectives and priorities for the future. Most impressive is the commitment we have found. The people who have participated want to stay engaged, to help monitor and implement the new agenda, just as they have been engaged in its design. This broad conversation was captured in the report presented in the margins of the UN General Assembly on September 23rd, and you have in here a copy for all of you. And this report really helped shape the outcome document adopted by member states on the special event on the UN General Assembly on the MDGs on September 25th, and is a very important step forward in the post-2015 discussion. Now, we need to tap this energy to build a renewed global partnership which delivers its ODA targets, strengthens global governance, and enhances policy coherence in international finance, macroeconomic, and trade architectures, and accounts for growing migration, demographic shifts, climate change, and the volatility of the markets. Effective multi-stakeholder partnerships are needed to support future goals, where civil society and the private sector have to take a more active role than in the present framework of the MDGs. Thematic partnerships, such as the Sustainable Energy for All initiative or the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, called Gavi, or the Global Fund for HIV/AIDS, Malaria, and TB, have proved successful in mobilizing financial resources, and should be deepened. As said before, Korea is also coming to the plate. The partnership between the Republic of Korea and UNDP through our MDG Trust Fund is a good example. This fund supports innovative, catalytic, and sustainable approaches for accelerated progress towards MDG achievements. Since its establishment in 2009, it has supported 9 country projects that seek to improve the livelihoods of the poor and vulnerable. At the global level, the fund also supports UNDP efforts to build and lead a strategic coalition of partners to shape the post-2015 development agenda through global mobilization and engagement. The Korean contribution of nearly $18 million towards the Trust Fund is empowering women, expanding social services, and building infrastructure to improve people's lives. By scaling up successful projects, the Trust Fund is supporting UNDP's work in transforming the lives of individuals and helping build stronger and more resilient nations. We also have an agreement signed in December 2010 for the UNDP Seoul Policy Center that is growing and strengthening through the years. This conference is about generating broader stakeholder dialogue on these very important topics, and I am confident that the discussions over the course of the day will be extremely fruitful in bringing our specific ideas on the implementation of the future agenda, an agenda that we agree has to be poverty-centered and planet-sensitive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Grynspan, for your opening comments. And also before that, His Excellency Tae-yul, Second Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs for Korea. So my colleagues here are going to do a little bit of reconfiguring of the stage so we can get on with our session. So that gives me a chance to explain a little bit more about today. The point of today, as we've heard, is to build on discussions that have started already about how to implement the post-2015 development agenda. And then also what we talk about here will feed into future conversations. Crucially, it'll feed into intergovernmental negotiations that will lead to implementation. So this conference really provides a crucial cornerstone in that conversation. Let me break down for you how the day will run. There are 4 parts to the day, divided up by breaks and lunch. In the beginning, in a few minutes' time, we're going to be starting off by talking about where the world is up to in working out the post-2015 agenda and how to implement that. We're going to be hearing from all sides of the conversation on that particular topic. And then session 2, which we'll move to this morning, that'll be a chance to hear the experiences of different countries. How have they implemented various development agendas? How has that worked out across a range of issues, including things like disaster risk and reduction, social protection flaws, public-private partnerships in things like health and education. After lunch, session 3 looks forward to suggestions for implementation strategies, new forms of partnership, including South to South, and potential challenges that lie ahead, focusing particularly on issues such as corruption, governance, accountability, and monitoring, the really hard, nitty-gritty stuff that needs to be dealt with. And then lastly, this afternoon, we will look back on the day's discussions and try to identify some recurring themes, maybe examine some areas that have been missed out so that we know what gaps need to be filled as the discussions continue. Throughout, hopefully, we're running a little bit late already, but hopefully we will have time for questions from the delegates during parts of the day. Microphones will be available. There'll be several people walking around with microphones, so when it comes to asking questions, please put up your hands, I'll call on you, and then somebody from a microphone will come to you and you can ask your question to any of the speakers present. If you want to tweet about the conference, and the hashtags are Seoul 2015 and Post 2015. I think we have a slide with those to show you. Okay. And then also outside the conference hall during the breaks, in the coffee room, you can take a look at the Korea UNDP MDG Trust Fund exhibit. There you can see photos and you can pick up some materials that will illustrate some of the projects the fund has put into practice around the world. I think Under Secretary General Grynspan was saying some 900 projects have been funded by that trust fund since it was set up. So that gives you a kind of idea of how this day will break down. I think our friends are pretty much done there, just getting the stage configured. So I think with that, let's move on now and let's start focusing on the first session of the day. And we've called this the high-level discussion on the post-2015 conversations so far. Now, this session will consider what are the lessons from the implementation of the MDGs. The questions we should be asking now are there obvious examples of how things should not have been done, or things that were not thought of, or that in practice turned out differently than expected? And these are all so important because they allow us to identify potential challenges in implementing the post-2015 agenda. It's about building better building blocks, if you like. Now, we know that there are already deliberations going on about what comes after 2015. One thing that has emerged is the view that all development is interconnected, so the next development framework must reflect the interdependencies of social, economic, and environmental sustainability. But what are the other critical issues that the post-2015 agenda must address? Hopefully, through the deliberations today, we'll start to pull out some of those. I'm going to invite our speakers to come up to the stage now, and then when they're up here, just as they start to speak, I'll introduce them and you'll understand the kind of breadth of their expertise and the scale of the deliberations that they're taking on. So, speakers, I think we're ready for you. If you'd like to come up to the stage as speakers in our first session. Among them, we'll be hearing from His Excellency Kim Sung-Hwan, who is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea and a member of the high-level panel. We're also going to be hearing again from Under Secretary General Grynspan. Among our guests again will be Dr. Kilapati Ramakrishna, who's the Director of the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. He'll be talking about Sustainable Development Goals. Also up here will be Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya from Bangladesh and Amitabh Bihar from India. They'll be talking about implementation. And Ms. Marilu Uy from the World Bank will talk about development financing. So I think they're pretty much all up on stage now. And then the way this will work, this session, is that I will invite each speaker to deliver some prepared remarks, and then we'll discuss some of the key questions, and then hopefully we'll open it up to questions. So now that we're all here, I'd like to start off by asking His Excellency Kim Sung-Hwan to from his seat to make some comments to us. He's the former Minister for Foreign Affairs for the Republic of Korea with more than 36 years' experience in a number of ministerial and senior diplomatic posts, and crucially for us today, he was a member of the high-level panel advising on global development in the post-2015 agenda. Your Excellency, if you'd like to take the floor, thank you very much.
Thank you, and Madam Grynspan, and distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And first, I wish to join our previous speakers in welcoming all of you to this conference. I believe this conference is a good opportunity to share experiences on the implementation of MDGs and develop ideas on the post-2015 implementation mechanism. As a member of the UN High-Level Panel on the post-2015 development agenda, I would like to explain to you the panel's ideas for future development aims with a focus on implementation. Last July, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon established a high-level panel composed of 27 members. The co-chairs of the panel were President Yudhoyono of Indonesia, President Sirleaf of Liberia, and Prime Minister Cameron of the United Kingdom. The panel was mandated to produce a bold but practical report on the post-2015 development plans, which was eventually submitted in late May of this year to the Secretary General. In order to draw up the report, the panel shared and discussed with a vast number of diverse global groups. We held national, regional, and thematic consultations with 5,000 civil society organizations, from 120 countries, 250 businesses from 30 different countries, with nearly $8 trillion of combined annual revenue, as well as many of the UN's specialized organizations. In addition, the panel surveyed around 500,000 people about their priorities in life. When we evaluate our reality and future, the panel forecasted the global population to be 8 billion by 2030 and 9 billion by 2050. By then, the population will have become more urbanized, more middle class, older, and more interdependent. Half the world's lower classes live in conflict-affected areas and are in urgent need of capable and responsive governance. Natural disasters have cost $2.5 trillion since the year 2000, putting the environmental assets of the poor under threat. If carbon emissions are not reduced below today's voluntary pledges, we will be faced with a 4 degrees Celsius rise in overall temperature. Therefore, a business as usual mindset and method is not at all adequate. Faced with this reality, the panel presented a vision to end all extreme poverty in the context of sustainable development and build a foundation of sustained prosperity for all humanity. If proposed to finish the remaining MDGs and address the issues of economic growth, social equality, and sustainable environment. Furthermore, it recommended a more people-centered and planet-sensitive direction in regards to the development agenda, as well as the establishment of new global partnerships to achieve the goals. The panel believes that the framework for the post-2015 development agenda must be universal. In other words, it must be relevant and accessible to all countries. It also thinks that sustainable development and poverty should be combined into one single sustainable development agenda. The panel has proposed 5 major transformative shifts for the post-2015 development agenda. The first one is to leave no one behind, making sure that everyone has equal opportunity without discrimination. In particular, the panel suggested that targets be considered achieved only when they are met for all relevant income and social groups. Secondly, the panel believes that sustainable development should be at the core of the development agenda. The establishment of a sustainable production and consumption pattern was recommended, as well as the alleviation of climate change and environmental degradation. Thirdly, we should transform economies for job creation and inclusive growth. To this end, the development agenda should enjoy innovation, technology, and the potential of business and of people themselves. Therefore, education, skills training, improved policies, and business practices are encouraged to create favorable working conditions. The panel believes that the fourth shift should be composed of building and maintaining peace with good governance as a basic starting point. Hence, effective and transparent public institutions are necessary, with an emphasis on the rule of law, freedom of speech and media, and access to justice and open political choice. The fifth shift for the development agenda should be on forging a new global partnership among all persons concerned, sharing the understanding that our fates are all linked together. In order to combine environmental and development agendas, new methods and ideas must be adopted. The parties concerned should strive to go beyond assistance and aid to actively discuss an international set of policies and increase long-term finances. In respect to implementing the post-2015 agenda, the panel recommended establishing 3 global partnerships, of which need springs from the diversification of actors in the development cooperation areas. First, global partnership is necessary at the national level when the post-2015 agenda is embedded in national development plans as national targets. While each national government may take initiative in their national planning process, international partners and agencies could be invited to assist countries implement their plans and achieve their targets. Through this partnership at the national level, the commitments of the providers can be aligned with the priorities of national governments, hence harmonizing their efforts with national plans. Second, global partnership is required by theme. This is particularly necessary in thematic areas related to global public goods, such as mitigation of climate change and issues of energy, food security, and health. These are issues that require collective actions at the global level. Otherwise, the world may suffer from the absence or failure of collective action. For example, the Sustainable Energy for All initiative, launched in 2011, aims to provide universal access to modern energy and double the global rate of improvement in energy efficiency, as well as double the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix, all by 2030. These partnerships are powerful because each partner comes to the table with direct knowledge and strong evidence based on thorough research. This enables them to innovate, to advocate convincingly for good policies, thus leading to the securement of funding. Third, global partnership is necessary for the global monitoring of the post-2015 agenda implementation at the national level and in the thematic dimensions, with the UN playing the leading role. It provides feedback for improvements across the world. Reporting and peer review at the regional level could complement the global monitoring process. By doing so, a global framework is intended in which ideas continue to evolve flexibly as opposed to a one-time fixed but permanent implementation mechanism. Furthermore, given that development efforts have been too often hampered by a lack of the most basic data on socio-economic circumstances, a new data revolution is needed. Enhanced data and the statistics will help governments track progress, make sure their decisions are evidence-based, and strengthen accountability. This concerns not only government, but also international agencies, CSOs, and the private sector. Regarding the financing issue, the panel believes that the principles and agreements established at Monterey remain valid for the post-2015 agenda. Aid will remain vital for low-income countries, but domestic source and private capital will be some of the most important sources for long-term finance. Countries should continue their efforts to invest in stronger tax systems, broaden their domestic tax base, and build a strong local financial market. Moreover, new channels and innovative financial instruments are needed to link sustainable projects and private capital derived from major pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and other investors. Lastly, the panel noted the importance of working with other global forums such as G7+, G20, and the Busan Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. For example, G20 can address global bottlenecks in areas such as food and energy by providing strategic recommendations. The Busan Global Partnership Forum can help countries and thematic groups establish effective partnerships that involve many different stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, today the Korean government and the UNDP are launching UNDP's Global Thematic Dialogue on the post-2015 implementation mechanism. This is a very meaningful and important initiative that will provide reference points to our global community in preparing for the upcoming intergovernmental consultations on the post-2015 agenda. I hope that the recommendations made by the UN High-Level Panel will serve as a useful starting point for the research for collective wisdom needed to tide over the overwhelming challenges of our time. I'd like to thank everyone involved in today's conference, and I hope this conference will be a meaningful experience for all. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Kim, thank you very much for your comments. I should have just pointed out that not only is he the former Foreign Minister for the Republic of Korea, but currently he is also the chair of the Institute for Global Social Responsibility, as it says on his name tag there. Apologies, Mr. Kim, but thank you very much for your comments. Under-Secretary General Grynspan, if you'd like to make some comments now, we'd be grateful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And let me greet the colleagues of the panel. It's an honor to be with all of you here. Thank you, Mr. Kim, for your very deep and understanding of the high-level panel recommendations. So what I will do is I will try to share with you the key findings of the UN Global Conversation on the Post-2015 Development Framework. And this conversation is far from over, but I think that the first thing that I should say is that it is a departure from how the MDGs were agreed last time. Because one of the critiques to the MDGs at the beginning was that they were very top-down. Although they really brought a lot of the recommendations from different conferences of the UN, the truth is that the Millennium Declaration was agreed in 2000 by the leaders of the world, and then the framework was developed in-house by the UN and launched afterwards to the world. There were no further consultations at that time. So learning from that experience, because now the MDGs seem to all of us like a norm. It's normal to talk about the MDGs. But in fact, it took us, and Ad is here, lived through part of that process. You know, it took us really 5 years to put in motion a platform for the MDGs after the 2000 declaration. It took 2 years to bring the indicators to the forefront. And many of the staff, even in the UN, didn't believe in the MDGs at the beginning. There was no buy-in to the MDGs when the MDGs started. So learning from that, we launched what I really believe is the widest consultation, bringing the citizens of the world to have their voice in what should be the priorities for the next framework. And this has been done in different forms, and you referred to some of them, Mr. Kim. First, there were national consultations, and we had 88 countries carried national consultations. We had global thematic consultations on different issues. We had 11 of them. And we implemented other forms that the citizens of the world could bring their ideas and vote for the priorities. We had the My World survey, and through this platform, more than 1 million people, as I said before, had voted for the priorities and to be considered for the next post-2015 agenda. Now, what are we hearing? Oh, maybe let me make the final consideration with respect to the form the consultations has been brought up. And is that we made a special effort to bring the voice of groups of the population of the world that we never hear from them. I am talking about inmates. I am talking about the poorest of the world, indigenous population, LGBT group, also small businesses, entrepreneurs, not only big businesses, displaced people, and people with disabilities. And through all of them, we made a special effort to bring the voices of women to the platform. So there was really an effort to make a very inclusive process of consultation. Now, what are we hearing, and what is what you have in the report that was launched by the Secretary General and the Administrator of UNDP on September 23rd? What are they telling us? Well, first, they are demanding more inclusivity and more voice throughout the process and after the agenda will be agreed by the international community. Citizens around the world told us very frequently that they want to be part of the decisions that affect them. They want to play a role in changing the world, and they want to be engaged. So how are we going to maintain people's engagement and participation throughout the process for the future framework is very important, and how we will put into the framework of implementation the monitoring frameworks for them to maintain their engagement and hold governments accountable. I really believe that one of the things that turned the corner with respect to this present framework of the MDGs was when civil society in the countries decided to internalize the MDGs into their dialogue with the national governments. When they decided to do that, to take the MDG framework as a possibility to have a more articulated and high-level dialogue with their governments, the MDGs really went much more into the DNA of the dynamic or at the national level. So we need to do that again this time. The second thing that was very clear from the voices of the people, from the consultation, is that they want to finish the unfinished business of the MDGs. You know, we haven't finished our business with the MDGs. We put as a target to halve extreme poverty, but there is another half to go. And that's why the high-level panel also recommended, you know, the elimination of extreme poverty in the world. The most two voted priorities were health and education that are also targets in the MDGs, and they want that agenda to continue. But they wanted that agenda, and that's something you both said, Mr. Cho and Mr. Kim. They don't want only access and quantity. They want also quality in the service that will be delivered by their governments. Quality is becoming a very important part of the agenda. And especially, I would say, that for the right reasons, for the reasons of success, because a lot of the people that have come out of extreme poverty and poverty around the world during these years are now demanding not only their access to education or their access to health, but they are demanding education to be of a quality that really will mean a different thing when they come to the labor market. They want health to be, you know, much more humane, and the quality of those services to be much better. Their voices are stronger today on the quality agenda than they were ever before. And this is very true for the emerging economies and the new middle classes that were put as an important trend in the population dynamic before. And young people are especially vocal with respect to the quality agenda and not only to the quantity agenda. The second thing, what they are telling us is, don't stop now. You have to accelerate progress towards 2015 because now the MDGs are a success. But if we stall progress and nothing is being done from now to in the 800 days that are left to accomplish the targets, if nothing is being done, then maybe in 2015 the MDGs won't be seen as so successful as we see them now. So to accelerate progress is very important, and to continue the agenda is also key. The second thing with respect to the voices of the people is the issue about the themes that were very weak in the MDG agenda. I won't go through all of them, and many of them were mentioned by Mr. Kim. But there is one very important one that I want to share with you, that is the whole issue of sustainable development. We have to agree that environment was very weak in the MDG framework that we have today. So how to be able to put the three pillars of sustainable development together? How do we face the environmental degradation, the climate change challenge, the threat to ecosystems where billions of people live from, is a very important part of the agenda. And how we are going to put them together in one development agenda forward. What is coming from the Sustainable Development Goals discussion and what is coming from the Post-MDG development agenda is really one of the main questions that we will have to answer for the future. The important news is that as the people is asking also in the high-level panel and the outcome document that was just approved by the General Assembly, there is now growing consensus that we need to go towards one development framework. It will be really a mistake to have two different paths, two different streams of goals and targets. You can imagine how difficult it is for a developing country to really answer to the needs and the accountability that is demanded from one framework. Imagine two. We will be taxing countries in a way that they won't be able to cope. So it's very important, this call for one coherent development framework coming from the Sustainable Development Goals discussion that is coming from Rio Plus 20 and the poverty-centered agenda that is coming from the MDGs post-2015 discussion. There are other areas where they are very keen to put their priorities also that has to do with, as you said, Mr. Kim, with employment and livelihoods, with peace and security that is not in the present framework, with rule of law, and as I said, the environmental degradation and sustainability agenda. The Energy for All example is a very good one of the triple win that we can have, putting that in the center. And the last one that I want to share with you with respect to the consultation, that I think that is key, is the emphasis on the quality also of the indicators and targets to account for the issue of inequalities and discrimination, of human rights and gender equality. They don't want only a gender equality standalone goal, they want gender equality to be mainstream in all the goals, but also the issues of inequalities. In the present MDG framework, everything, all the targets are average targets. So you know that in growing inequality societies, you know averages many times hide more than what they show. And they hide precisely the reality of the most vulnerable groups in society. How can we have targets that will disaggregate by the main inequalities that we see at the global level and be specific enough for the inequalities that drive the inequality agenda at the national level is one of the main questions that we will have to answer to. And this has to do also with the human rights agenda that is so important and has been so importantly voiced by the consultations. And my last point is that we were very surprised that the third priority after education and health in the consultation was good governance and responsive governance. And this was really a surprise. This was very strongly brought forward by all the consultations that we have had, the national consultations as much as the voting system in the My World platform. You know, people want more transparent and accountable governments. They want governments that are more responsive to the people. They want also a more inclusive and participation stream in the next framework in the post-2015 development agenda. So I think that these are very strong, very clear messages. They are much in sync with the high-level panel recommendations and also with the outcome decision that we had in the UN General Assembly high-level discussion. Now, I really believe that the way the high-level panel resolved all these requests and at the same time did not go for the Christmas tree, solution, that is everything about everything, that will really go against what made the MDG successful, that were specific targets, was very easy to communicate. People could understand and relate to the targets that were set, and they were monitorable and measurable. We have to maintain the strength of the MDGs in the framework forward. I think that the high-level panel and the discussions in the UN right now are very much a good step forward in this direction of having a framework that, although there are themes that have to come in, and there are the people are asking for a deepening of the framework, is also maintains the simple formulation, communicable, that we are able to communicate, that is measurable and monitored through time. If we are able to do that and take all these voices into account, I'm sure we will have, by 2015, a very firm, strong framework to go forward in the years to come towards 2030. Thank you very much.
Undersecretary General, thank you very much. Remaining speakers, if I could just remind you, please address your comments to the floor, if for no other reason than if you talk to your colleagues, you end up being quite off mic, and no one can really hear you. So please just speak forwards, and speakers also. That wasn't at all a reflection on you, Undersecretary, at all. And in order that we can get some questions in this session, speakers, I would also ask you if you could keep your comments to around 5 minutes. I know that's, I saw your eyes go up there, Mr. Bahar, but I'm sure you can be concise, pithy, and informative in 5 minutes for all our colleagues here so that they can get some questions to you in. One point that the Undersecretary General raised in her comments just now was about one of the weaknesses identified in the MDGs, and that was the issue of sustainable development. It segues very easily then to our next guest, Dr. Kilapati Ramakrishna, who is the director of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, the East and Northeast Asia office. He has pretty much spent a large part of his professional career becoming an expert in sustainable development, and he's going to address us on sustainable development goals. Doctor, thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe I have a PowerPoint presentation, but I don't see it. But it is a great honor to be part of this panel, and I want to thank UNDP and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Korea for hosting this very important dialogue and the launch of the new global discussion. The topic, just in the nature of introduction, let me also say that I spent about 5 years working for the United Nations Environment Program before joining UNESCAP, and I want to begin my presentation in the interest of time with the speech that the Secretary General had given in the opening session of the General Assembly. And there are various aspects of this that are already referred to by Minister Cho, Minister Kim, and of course Undersecretary General Grynspan. I want you to just pay attention to the highlighted part of it, talking about what the task in front of us. The Secretary General said that what we need to do, our goal is to devise a set of goals that are universal, with ending poverty as its top priority, sustainable development at its core, and governance as its glue. It must find expression in a single set of goals. So what we have, the challenge that we have is really that, and I will come back to more things, but before I go on, I want you to just pay attention to the last thing that the Secretary General said also, which is that the change is inevitable, but progress is not. Leadership makes the difference. And so the appeal is both to the leaders that are meeting in the General Assembly and elsewhere, but also to the public, the people, who have a set of views, as Undersecretary General Grynspan had pointed out. Oh, sorry. All right. The first thing I want to show very briefly is this. The reason for showing this is that the idea of coming to crystallize a set of governing principles on how we should conduct ourselves is not new. Though Rio +20 had specifically asked for sustainable development goals, beginning from the Stockholm Conference on Human Environment onwards, we have had a series of things. In 1992, we had a Rio Declaration containing several principles, and of course the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg, and moving on to the Millennium Development Goals, and so on. The thing to keep in mind, of course, is this. The key outcomes of the Rio Plus 20 talks about the institutional framework for sustainable development. And this is very important in terms of what we might do with sustainable development goals and how we develop them and where we go with them. I want to very quickly draw your attention to the Secretary General's report on a life of dignity for all. This report is important for all sorts of reasons, and one of the most important reasons is that it had tried to crystallize the knowledge that came, the recommendations that came out of various reports, not just the environment and sustainable development part of it, but also the economic, social, and governance part of it. And there are key recommendations, and again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through these recommendations. Minister Kim had talked about the high-level panel and the recommendations that they have. They came up with about 12 goals as sustainable development goals, and I tried to juxtapose them with Sustainable Development Solutions Network that Professor Jeffrey Sachs led, and they have come up with 10 goals. And when you look at that, what you see in this is really the unfinished business of the Millennium Development Goals and the kinds of voices from the field that Madam Grynspan had talked about. But this is the easier part. Difficult as it may sound, this is the easier part, getting to the targets and indicators and how we want to make sure that the various issues associated with implementation, etc., is the critical part. When you look at the emerging consensus on sustainable development goals, again, previous speakers have talked about it, that they be limited in number, not a Christmas tree, then that they should be universal, implementable, measurable, integrate all three pillars of sustainable development. Now, these sound interesting and words that you can hardly quibble, but also the most difficult ones to accomplish in a body that is about 193 countries in the world trying to come to a closure on that. We need to bridge the gap between Millennium Development Goals implementation and the Sustainable Development Agenda. And of course, means of implementation is a key part of the things that we need to do in this thing. I have three sets of concluding remarks, and this is the first one of that. When we look at the Global Environmental Outlook produced by the United Nations Environment Program and all of their various partners, the Global Sustainability Panel, a powerful report that came before the Rio Plus 20, the United Nations Task Team, as well as the high-level panel in the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, we have a rich, not to mention the voices from the field, we have a rich source material to work on what the Sustainable Development Goals ought to be. As UNEP said, for many in the United Nations Environment Program, the environmental agenda and sustainable development agenda is one and the same. One of the things that those that are very focused on environment oftentimes say is, well, MDG 7 didn't really work very well, so what we need are sustainable development goals where we expand what did not work. I think that is a wrong approach. And it is also a wrong approach to think, as some have done, to think about sustainable development goals as a way to get to the developing countries do things that they have not done with various implementation of various international agreements. So what UNEP said is that there should be a culmination and a convergence of agendas, and that is what we are trying to work towards. The open working group of 30 member countries plus is in the middle of their deliberations and will have the report and the results ready for submission by the next session. The question, of course, is combining or overcoming the institutional, technological, financial, and capacity development barriers in implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. It will come later, but I hope that it will not be a hindrance in the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, because we do need to have some way of doing this. And I've already talked about the voices from the future, from the field, so I will not say anything more. The second set of concluding remarks are, the climate change. This is the envelope within which people say all the environment and development issues are to be discussed and decided. And we have an important timeline, 2015 coming up, the agreement for the next round of negotiations, next round of implementation, and that is going to play a big part in what the United Nations General Assembly does and the high-level panel does in terms of the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. The steps that need to be taken, of course, are very vital, integrating the 3 dimensions of sustainable development and drawing from their synergies, and, of course, modifying and adopting the report. The final point I want to make is this. The challenge before us, Under Secretary General Grynspan had said very clearly the distinction between adopting the Millennium Declaration and adopting the Millennium Development Goals, while that was not very democratic, going through this process is not going to be an easy one. It is already, we have seen how many different views there are, but this is probably the most important thing that the international community and the United Nations has done, to have one agenda that brings together all the different agendas and, clarifies matters. Every time we talk about one of these sectoral issues, there is always the question about what about the other 20 other issues that we have not paid. So this is a great opportunity through the Sustainable Development Goals to integrate the different agendas and moving us forward in the right direction. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Ramakrishna, thank you for the conciseness and pithiness of your comments and for negotiating the somewhat awkward ergonomics of being seated at the table and referring to the screen. I'm told, remaining speakers, if you have a presentation that you'd like to do, you can actually use the far podium where there's a video monitor so you can actually see your slides as well. Next up, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Debapriya Bhattacharya, who is a distinguished fellow at the Center for Policy Dialogue in Dhaka. He's also the chair of a very important organization called Southern Voices on Post-MDG International Development Goals. It's a network of 49 think tanks drawn from South Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Dr. Bhattacharya, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good morning to you all. Let me first thank Minister Cho, Minister Kim, Madam Grynspan, distinguished participants, colleagues, my fellow members of the panel. I'm very pleased and delighted to be here. I think that we are having this meeting at a very opportune moment. As you know, during the last year or so, the consultation on how the post-MDG international development goals will look like had been discussed globally and at a national level and regional level. In the recent meeting of the UN General Assembly, the Secretary General tried to pull all those threads together. And as you have heard already, the SDG Open Working Group is in session. They have 3-4 sessions ahead still, and hopefully they will come together with a set of recommendations. And as you know, SDG Open Working Group is already a quasi-intergovernmental process, and soon the intergovernmental negotiation sessions will start. I think that's why this particular session, which is exclusively, at least especially focusing on the implementation issue, is quite opportune, quite right at this moment. I want to compliment the Korean government and also UNDP for convening this. This is possibly one of the first meetings which is taking place to reflect on the instruments of implementation. It is starting pretty early, right at the end, but I think it is, as I said, it is the right moment for that. So I'm very pleased to be here to raise some of these issues. The background has already been provided, so I will go straight to some of the major critical issues which currently torments us both as an academic and as a policy practitioner. As you know, what is an implementation? Some people have said, and in fact my teacher in the primary school told me, it's not the dream which matters, it is also a plan which matters. But all these things only comprise 10% of the real work. Implementation through hard work and some luck is essentially the 90%. So that 90% work, how we are going to do, this is the matter of discussion. Now, in order to have the implementation process on, what we would need possibly the necessary institutional structures, the instruments and the stream of activities and policies which will realize the intended objectives. We'll have to manage the delivery of those inputs, and we'll have to measure the intended outputs and the outcomes, and you obviously realize the difference between the two, outputs and outcome. And we need to have an operational look for feedback mechanism, because we would need to do mid-course corrections. And last but not the least, this institutional mechanism, which will ensure the implementation of post-2015 development goals, will have to address the fault lines of the MDGs. MDGs were great, but they were not without faults. Let me see some of the fault lines which were there in the MDGs, and will they be addressed here. The first and foremost fault, the shortcomings of MDGs in connection to implementation was there was no adequate accountability mechanism. The accountability mechanism, as it was, essentially to the intergovernmental process, and it was very limited in nature, and it was always limited quite often to some of the reports which really were not necessarily reflecting the grassroots realities. The second problem with the MDGs were that it was too much market determined, and in that sense, it did not really precipitate some of the structural changes in the last 15 years we had been looking for in the low-income countries. There was no growth in manufacturing. There was essential growth only in extractive industries in trade, based on mining and quarrying in Africa. And there was no productive capacity-related employment as we have liked to see. If you go through all the indicators relating to MDGs, the one which has been systematically non-performed is the employment as the ratio of the total population. So that is a major one. The public expenditure in the fiscal space. Since the MDGs never had a macroeconomic framework, there was no assessment about the fiscal space for expenditures on health, education, and other issues. The inadequate resource flow. The less I talk about it, the better it is. This is the belied promise of MDG 8, as we know very well. The real flow of ODA, not only to the LDCs, but in general to the low-income countries, have fallen in real terms in 2012. It is the OECD estimates, not mine. And there is hardly any country, only 2 possibly, or 3 countries have enhanced their ODA flow in the post-crisis, global crisis period. If you look at the security agenda which dominated in the recent past, the global politics have taken away a lot of resources from us. So those resources are essentially the diverted resources. Will they come back in the post-2015? We will like to know. The global financial crisis was an unintended event in the post-2000 period. And the global crisis has shown that it has affected the innocent countries as bystanders, and they're yet to realize and go back to their benchmark at this moment. Reform of the global rules, the WTO Doha negotiation stalls, the UNFCCC climate discussion stalls. There is no discussion as such on the global financial architecture, and we also know how it is happening with other areas, including intellectual property right and other issues. The climate issue has become a real pain in the whole process, and now, which we could not solve in UNFCCC or other intergovernmental processes, we would like to think that we will be able to deliver in the SDG. I can't think a better bluff in this case, as we can see. Last but not least issue is the data issues, the information. Information for us is not only about measurement, it is a transparency issue, it's an accountability issue. And we are now struggling with that as we go. I'll be very brief in 2 other issues and then conclude. The issue is about how do you implement all these promises which will be coming through. And I hope that this will be ambitious enough, not reduced to lowest common denominator to achieve a global consensus in this area. The one is obviously the financing issue. One particular part is quite obvious now. ODA is important, but this is not all. ODA has to be delivered. It has to be, the commitments have to be respected, which has been made in international forum. But we all understand it will not be enough. So domestic resource mobilization, foreign direct investment, remittances, sovereign wealth fund, other innovative ways of financing will be important. But will financing be enough to deliver this goal? No. We will need non-financial resources, efficiency gains from the reforms of the global rules and global institutions. The WTO multilateral system has to function. The intellectual property rights should not become a barrier to access to technology. And we will have to get a resolution of the climate-related issues to protect the vulnerable countries. So all these non-financial issues have to come as a support. Coordination and information will be important. We still do not have an adequate mechanism to oversee the implementation of the post-MDG mechanism. We are just going forward to creating a political, high-level political and economic forum, which had some of its meeting recently, to oversee all these things. Will it really ensure the global economic governance, what we have been talking about? The reports which have come through, I have tried to collate some of the issues which have been said there, and we would like to see how all these things will perform. And one of the major area of that will be the role of the new donors, which includes definitely Korea, and also the South-South cooperation, and I wouldn't have time to comment on this. To conclude, in the new implementation architecture, will the fault lines of the MDGs be addressed? We want more discussion on that, without have to be dispassionate in this. Will there be adequate tools and resources to implement the MDGs? Any student of public administration knows if you have more goals than your number of tools, you are never going to achieve them. So each of the goals have to be seen, mapped against each of the instruments and tools, both at global, national level, with adequate resource endowment. How the countries with special needs will be accommodated within a structure, within an universal framework. How the issues of the least developed countries, the small island development states, the conflict countries, post-conflict countries will be accommodated within an universal setup. Because how their special needs will be addressed to specific goals and targets, we are yet to understand that. National priorities and sequencing with a universal framework. Universal framework is fine, as long as you can accommodate the special needs of the countries and the national priorities. And how exactly will it be balanced in terms of rights and responsibilities, particularly when we talk about the climate issues? The global coordination mechanism is very wanting. As I mentioned, there is no specific, both information and executive power-wise and a political guidance-wise, and how it will be done. The new post-MDG framework talks about new players in the game. There have been given higher importance to the parliamentarians, to the local government officials, to the NGOs, the community-based organization, and definitely the private sector. But how they will really play their game in a very restrictive intergovernmental process in the coming days. And last but not the least, the data revolution, which has been a word which has now been revolutionized. And we look forward how this data revolution will be unpackaged at the country level in creation of new capacities for bringing in more transparency and more accountability. Colleagues, the game is just starting. We have a lot to do. Thank you.
Dr. Bhattacharya, thank you very much. We're next going to be hearing from Mr. Amitabh Bihar. He's the Executive Director of the National Foundation for India, which is a leading Indian foundation working for promoting and nurturing social justice philanthropy in India. He's also co-chair of the Global Call to Action Against Poverty. Mr. Bihar, I'm going to ask you to keep your comments to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and represent the National Foundation for India and the Global Call to Action Against Poverty. Many thanks for the invitation. I just thought that I'll try and look at means of implementation by also looking back. We should start the conversation still going back to the Millennium Declaration. It was an extremely ambitious declaration, which did build on the ambitions and activism of the 90s, and we have heard about that, whether it was Rio, Beijing, Copenhagen, and so on, which also talked of freedom from fear and freedom from want. However, unfortunately, and that's the point of departure I have with many of our colleagues around the world, when we started looking at the Millennium Development Goals, in fact, in civil society, we call them the minimum development goals, there was a huge reduction in ambition. And we started looking at a reductionist frame instead of a universal human rights frame. So that, I think, has been one big worry that we need to address. The second worry, which I think has already been said, and in the last couple of years, it's coming out very prominently, is the absence of the sustainability agenda, which fortunately now is on top of the agenda, and we're looking hopefully at an integrated frame of SDGs and MDGs. I must also congratulate the extremely consultative process that we have seen over the past couple of years. It's been phenomenal in terms of its outreach, both through the UNDP and the UN in terms of the country consultations, thematic consultations, but also through the online consultations. The high-level panel outreach was fantastic. So we're really looking at a consultative process, hopefully, which is hearing to the voices of the common people, unlike the bunker story of the framing of MDGs that we heard. So that's again a huge positive. But I think now we're looking at another crucial landmark in terms of the process now moving into the open working group, high-level political forum. I think the challenge for all of us is to maintain the level of inclusiveness of process that we have seen in the past 2 years. Many of us in civil society are extremely worried that once it gets into this intergovernmental process, where would be the spaces for civil society and people's voices? So that's another important challenge. Let me just now look at some substantive issues. I think it's fantastic to see the high-level panel report and the Secretary General's report, which are talking of leave no one behind and talking of a life of dignity for all. But I think that we are missing something here. There is a very, very strong narrative of anger globally. What we saw in the Arab Spring, what we saw in the Occupy movement, what we saw in the anti-corruption movement in India, and we are not responding even through these reports to this narrative of anger. There's another narrative of aspirations of common people. I don't see these reports actually being able to respond to that. So we certainly need to raise the bar much higher now. It's not about extreme poverty. We need to be looking at a framework of justice, of substantive justice for all. I think that decisive shift needs to be made, and this is a historic opportunity, and I would say, for the global leadership, a historic responsibility as well. In terms of looking at the key principles, once we are looking at this decisive shift in terms of the framework, we need to be focusing on 5 principles. I'll be very brief given the paucity of time. But one, and we've already heard about this, is the focus on the socially excluded. They were somehow left behind in the aggregate picture. And when I say socially excluded, I'm talking of caste in India, indigenous populations, minorities, LGBTs, and so on. I think they need to be the central piece, central attention of the framework that we're looking at. The second is to talk of gender justice. And on gender justice, I would also very strongly say that our emphasis in MDGs was pretty much in the public sphere. I think we need to now go beyond and look at the private sphere as well. And that's been the learning of the feminist movement, where we're talking of personal as political, so looking at reproductive sexual health rights as well. The third is environmental justice. And there's a lot of conversation around environmental sustainability. But I think we need to really move to a framework of environmental justice. As Mahatma Gandhi said, that there's enough for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed. I think that's very important. Just to give you a very small personal anecdote, I was filling an application for going from Delhi to Johannesburg and back. And I had to do a very interesting carbon footprint indicator. And I was very surprised and appalled and extremely worried. The carbon footprints of my flight from Delhi, Joburg, and back is 5 times the per capita carbon footprints of Indian people. So that's the level of injustice, inequality we're looking at. We'll need to really focus on that. The fourth is, and that's something which I've not heard in the framing much, is the people's right to livelihood. People's right over land, water, and forest. most of the people in South still survive for their livelihood on land, water, and forest. And you're seeing a trend of privatization of these. So I think we'll need to really focus on that. And the fifth, which has been talked of, but it's extremely crucial, is the question of governance accountability. Governance accountability at the national level, which we see corruption, we see impunity, lack of rule of law, but also of the global governance architecture. More importantly, also of the financial architecture, including trade architecture. And I think equally important is corporate accountability. Quickly moving on to the path ahead. It was fantastic to see indicators. As I said, they were reductionist, but they gave all of us a framework to work with. Our suggestion is that we need to have some breakup of the indicators. They certainly should be disaggregated. We cannot continue with an aggregated framework. And then we need to have 3 sets of indicators. This is a recommendation we've been making now. One is the outcome indicators, which were pretty much present in the MDGs. But we'll need to move beyond. And that hopefully would partially respond to some concerns what Dr. Bhattacharya was raising. The second set is the process indicators. If the WHO proposes that 5% of GDP should be on public health, why can't we bring that as a process indicator? I think it would be important. Without process indicators, we'll not be able to have a good monitoring framework. And the third is inclusion indicators. So really looking at the most excluded and their access, say, to quality education, access to water, instead of looking at the aggregate picture. The next point I want to make is, I think we're all talking about the new partnership model. But my worry is that very often we talk of new partnership, but that's really just a garb of talking of partnership between state and the private sector. I think we need to inverse the pyramid and start talking of people, local government, parliamentarians, civil society, in which private sector is also an important actor. Just moving ahead, a couple of other points. I think we've already talked about it, but it's very important that when we start looking at financing for development, we do not start leaning on the private sector. We are already looking at that trend, and it's important that states take the responsibility. In fact, almost 200 civil society groups got together in Bonn from all over the world, and we have issued a red flag statement. One of the key points is that the state has to take responsibility for financing for development. Complete reworking of Goal 8, clear responsibilities for the North, and then accountability of the private sector. Just a couple of concluding thoughts. While we move ahead, we need to be focusing on a clear monitoring process as well, which could be built around what we've already heard, regular periodic reporting. We can talk of peer reviews. We need to also look at accountability by people and also possibilities for mid-course correction. So in the end, I would say we've covered a lot of ground in the last couple of years, but if we are going to move ahead with the spirit of Millennium Declaration and what's coming out as people's aspiration, we need a very strong people's campaign. We need people's involvement and people's centrality in the new framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amitabh Behar. Our last speaker in this session is going to be Marilu Uy, Senior Advisor to the World Bank's Special Envoy on MDGs and Development Financing. Ms. Uy, thank you. And if I could ask you again to keep your comments to 5 minutes, otherwise there'll be no time for coffee, and we all understand the implications of that. Thank you very much.
I'm a little shorter, to be honest. Okay, I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation to join this panel discussion on the challenges of implementing the post-2015 development goals. My remarks today will focus primarily on development financing, which will be an important part of implementation of the post-2015 agenda. a number of my co-panelists have acknowledged the importance of this topic in terms of assuring that implementation of the post-2015 agenda is a success. Now, such a framework, of course, the presentation I have today is pretty much a framework that I offer for discussion, we offer for discussion. And it is an important development in the deliberation of the post-2015 development goals that the discussion on financing is integrated well with the discussion of the goals themselves. So that is a very good early step in thinking about implementation. Now, what I will show today is just to show to highlight some of the challenges that one would encounter, that policymakers and development partners together would encounter in making sure that financing comes about from the various sources that my co-panelists have also mentioned. So let's start with, oops. Now, what we have here is a two-pronged approach to supporting a post-2015 development framework. The ability to adequately finance the development agenda post-2015 will depend on many factors. And we will discuss these factors in what we label a two-pronged approach to financing. The first one is to increase the impact of available resources, and the second part is to increase these resources. And a supporting policy environment and institutional environment will be quite important to enhance the effectiveness of available resources as well as the ability to leverage additional resources. All these are not surprising. So let me just go to some of the challenges that we would face in implementing this two-pronged approach. In this presentation, I'd like to highlight some parameters to considering a financing framework. At the country level, we would take a look at generating domestic resources, the efficiency of public spending, as well as much better development of the financial sector. And we'll also take a look at maximizing the impact of ODA, supporting new development partners, and leveraging the private sector. I will try to skip some of the slides at the end of this presentation because of time. So let's start with generating more domestic revenues. A number of our panelists mentioned the importance of this. Developing countries themselves will need to take the lead in generating domestic resources for development. And one, of course, would like to take a look at taxation capacity, which here shows that the tax to GDP ratios do vary with income. And clearly, lower income countries would have lower tax revenue as a percentage of GDP, which is probably not surprising. But if one takes a look at the trends on generating more domestic revenues, one would see that the taxation capacity of middle-income countries have actually increased. And in terms of lower-income countries, on the other hand, while they have shown some improvement over the last 2 decades, it's quite clear that there is still a large scope for them to improve their taxation capacity, especially if one takes a look at their taxation effort. And taxation effort is the behavior of tax collection in relation to their economic potential. And a study that we have done shows that pretty much a good range of lower income countries that have tax to GDP ratios below 15% have actually lowered their tax efforts over the past decades. So the scope is there to increase the mobilization of domestic resources in terms of taxes, and the resource base should also be there in the sense that if one takes a look at the number of countries in Africa, for every dollar of foreign assistance they receive, they actually were able to generate $10 of own resources revenues for development. Now, beyond taxation, we also, the harnessing of revenues from natural resources is also a very important area. And just how important it is shown by how many of the fragile economies or fragile or conflict-affected economies have say, valuable extractive resources. Over 80% of these countries, FCS countries, are home to valuable extractive resources. In terms of domestic resource mobilization, one can't only talk about revenues, one also has to take a look at the potential for public expenditure reforms. And here, let me just illustrate with one example. Here, fossil fuel subsidies in the world amounted to about $409 billion in 2010 alone, and only 8% of that went to the poorest. Now, let's say the poorest 60% of the population benefit less from these subsidies than the wealthiest quintile. So there clearly is scope to improve the public spending. And there are other examples of public spending that do not reach their intended recipients, but there also are examples of spending that do. So the scope for ensuring more efficient public spending is clearly there. Still on the domestic front, one can't only talk about domestic tax revenues or natural resource revenues. The development of the financial sector is also quite there. One of the co-panelists mentioned the importance of a vibrant private sector. And here, financial sector development managed in a way that is stable and inclusive would have the potential to support domestic investment. Let's now move to ODA themselves. Here, if you take a look on your right, are the gross financial flows to fragile states. Here, it's quite clear the ODA is particularly critical, and the FCS for FCS countries. Now, the fragile states are clearly worried, have reason to be worried, if ODA continues to decline, because one would expect that ODA would continue to be an important part of financing of fragile states. Now, the challenge is to maintain the levels of ODA, in fact, increase it, but also to maximize the impact of ODA in terms of development results. There's also been talk about collaboration with new development partners. Now, let's just go through a few of them. One is the BRICS. And here, aid from the BRICS, led by China, has been rising over the past decade. Now, what is quite evident is that the estimated aid from them is still small compared to the net ODA from DAC countries of about 120 million. But the engagement of these non-traditional players would have the potential to change the aid landscape. The challenge ahead is to make sure that these donors, this new source of development finance, would lead to the best possible development outcomes. Still on new development partners, again, my co-panelists mentioned increasing aid ODA from a number of new partners. And here, Korea on the top is the green line. And you can see that ODA from Korea, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey notably have been increasing over the past few years. ODA from non-DAC donors, excluding the BRICS, have also been increasing, and that's at the lower quadrant. Again, the challenge here is to make sure that one taps on these new development partners so that they would finance, let's say, initiatives that would yield the best development results. Still on new development partners, one has spoken about private aid or philanthropy. And here the data is quite varied, but even the low estimate is equivalent to 16% of ODA from all donors in the same year. And it has gone up since 2005. Private philanthropy to fragile states have also been increasing in recent years, and so have South-South philanthropy. So here, one would probably want to study more or know more about how these are utilized, and I think this is room for further research. There's also the third area that have been emphasized in the financing framework is how to leverage the private sector. And here you have direct foreign investment, which is quite an important part of financing, private financing in developing countries. And also a number of developing countries have increased their capacity to source international capital markets. But still the needs are much greater than what might be available. And also the instruments may not always be the most appropriate, especially in some areas. And here I pose as an example infrastructure financing. One has heard a lot about public-private partnerships and their potential. But if one takes a look at the record of well-structured initiatives that would make governments and private sector come together to meet infrastructure needs, one sees a challenge ahead. On the part of the government, an important challenge is to put in place regulatory frameworks that would improve the bankability of projects. And on the part of the multilateral development banks, it could play a role in terms of facilitating these types of projects through assistance in reducing risks, perhaps through insurance or guarantees that would address political risk or country risk considerations. And here, if you see Kenya and Lake Kivu in Rwanda, the role of multilateral development banks, including the World Bank Group, has been quite transparent, and most of it has been in co-financing, but also in providing country risk guarantees. This would actually be the last part that I would do on the leveraging of the private sector. And here, there has been a lot of reference to the valuable resources that one could obtain from institutional investors. And here, you would see almost 70 trillion of resources that are in investment funds, pension funds, and insurance companies. But if one takes a look at where they invest, it is almost wholly on their home countries, and a very, very small proportion goes to long-term financing for infrastructure, for example, which would be quite important for financing the post-2015 development agenda. So there is a big challenge ahead in terms of finding the tools and the means to obtain, to enable and to encourage these large institutional investors to put their money in emerging and developing economies. So let me just conclude with some basic messages. It's quite clear that promoting policies, good policies, and a supporting institutional framework would be instrumental in attracting additional resources for financing, but also in making sure that available resources are used well. Governments can mobilize domestic resources for development by broadening the tax base, harnessing revenues from natural resources, improving the expenditure efficiency, as well as promoting financial sector development. But ODA will continue to be an important source of financing, especially for low-income and fragile states. It will be important to maximize the impact of available ODA, but also going forward, ODA will simply not be enough to fund development finance. The challenge of policymakers and development partners ahead is to tap more effectively domestic resources of financing and build strategic partnerships to leverage creatively new sources of financing from official and private sectors. Each country would be able to tap these new sources differently, and the suitable combination of financing sources and investments and instruments will be quite different across countries. What will be needed is to find the means and the partnerships to be able to leverage financing sources from public and private sector and from the official as well as the private sector to enable implementation of the post-2015 agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Uy, and thank you very much to all our speakers in this first session. I think we'll all agree that the breadth of the issues that you touched upon reminds us of the scale and scope of the post-2015 development agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite you now to continue the discussions over a cup of coffee in the room back there behind us. Remember also that you can take the time to look at the Korea UNDP Millennium Development Goal Trust Fund exhibit, which is just around the corner there. I'm going to ask you to be back in the room at 11 o'clock so that we can start shortly after that with our next session. Thank you very much indeed.